The wind cut through the frozen wasteland like sharp knives, and snow fell in thick, blinding sheets. Ethan pulled his thin coat tighter around his body, trying to keep warm. His boots sank into the icy ground as he walked carefully over the uneven terrain. The colony behind him was small, cold, and almost empty. Most people had gone deeper into the city, hiding from the storms and the dangers outside. But Ethan couldn't stay inside. He had to find something to eat. Something to survive. He had been searching for hours and found nothing but frozen rocks and empty snowdrifts. His stomach growled, and his fingers were stiff and numb. Just as he began to think of heading back, something unusual caught his eye, a faint glimmer, a soft light reflecting from behind a jagged ice formation. Curiosity pulled him forward, and his boots crunched over the frost. As he got closer, he realized it wasn't light reflecting off the ice. It was movement. Tiny, weak movements. He stopped and peered through the snow, squinting. There, trapped in a small crevice between two ice walls, was a creature. A tiny dragon, no bigger than a cat, curled up and shivering violently. Its scales were pale blue, almost transparent, and its small wings trembled with each gasp. Its eyes, large and round, looked straight at Ethan. They were wide with fear, and for a moment, Ethan felt like the dragon was looking right into his heart. Ethan froze. Dragons were dangerous, everyone said. Stories from the elders told of dragons attacking villages, breathing fire, and destroying everything. But this little thing didn't look dangerous. It looked scared, cold, and helpless. It made soft whimpering noises, like it was begging for help. Something inside Ethan stirred. He felt a strange warmth in his chest despite the cold. He wanted to help. But he also hesitated. What if it was a trap? What if the stories were true? He looked around. The wasteland was empty. No one was near. Just him and the little dragon. The wind blew harder, and the small creature shivered again. Its tiny claws scraped the ice as if asking him to come closer. Hey, little one," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling from the cold and fear. The dragon tilted its head and made a soft, almost human-like whine. Ethan's heart tightened. He knew he couldn't just leave it there. Not like this. He knelt slowly, keeping his movements calm. The dragon flinched at first, hissing softly, but it didn't run. Ethan stretched out his hand carefully. The dragon's cold nose brushed against his fingers. It was trembling so much he could feel it through his gloves. "It's okay, you're safe now," he said. He wrapped the little creature gently in his scarf, trying to give it some warmth. The dragon whimpered softly, curling closer to him. Ethan stood up, holding the dragon carefully against his chest. It felt so light, almost fragile. He realized it had been injured as well. Its left wing hung slightly crooked, and tiny scratches lined its scales. He didn't know what had happened, but he knew he couldn't leave it behind. The wind picked up again, stronger this time, throwing snow into his face. He squinted ahead and saw the small shelter he had built near the rocks. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He began walking, taking small, careful steps. The dragon clung to him, its small body shivering against his coat. Every step was difficult. The snow was thick, and his own body was cold and stiff. But Ethan didn't care. He kept glancing down at the little creature. It looked up at him with eyes that seemed too big, too knowing for something so small. He felt a strange connection, as if the dragon was silently thanking him, trusting him already. Halfway to the shelter, the dragon made a soft noise, almost a purr. Ethan smiled despite the cold. "You like that, huh?" he whispered. The dragon snuggled closer. He had never felt anything like it. Something about the creature's vulnerability, its trust in him, made him feel alive. Made him feel like he had a purpose beyond just surviving the cold. When they finally reached the shelter, Ethan set the dragon down carefully on a pile of blankets. It looked around, shivering, but safe for the first time. Ethan gathered more snow to melt and make water, warmed some rations, and tried to feed it. The dragon sniffed at the food, then nibbled slowly, watching Ethan the whole time. He sat back on a small rock, exhausted, and looked at the little dragon. "I don't know what you are, or where you came from," he said quietly, "but I promise, I'll take care of you. No matter what." The dragon's eyes met his, and for a moment, it almost seemed to nod. Ethan shivered, not from the cold this time, but from a strange feeling in his chest. Something had changed. Something had begun. And neither of them knew how dangerous, or amazing, their journey was about to become. Outside, the wind howled and the snow continued to fall. But inside that tiny shelter, a boy and a dragon huddled together. Two fragile beings against a harsh, frozen world, united by courage, trust, and the promise of something greater than either of them could imagine. Ethan could hear the wind howling outside the small shelter, rattling the walls and sending chills down his spine. He had covered the entrance as best as he could with frozen scrap metal and old blankets, but the storm made it feel like the world itself wanted to crush him. He glanced down at the little dragon curled up on the pile of blankets. Its scales were beginning to warm from his own body heat, but it still trembled. He needed to get more food and water, but the thought of leaving Flare, he had already decided to call the dragon that, alone made his stomach tighten. What if someone came? What if the dragon got hurt again? The thought of losing it, even for a moment, was unbearable. Ethan wasn't a hero. He was just a boy trying to survive. But somehow, this tiny, fragile creature had changed everything. The door flap rattled again, and Ethan tensed. He hadn't seen anyone yet, but rumors from the colony had warned him, dragons were dangerous, and anyone found helping one could be in trouble. The older villagers believed dragons were curses, harbingers of destruction. Some hunters made a living by killing them. Helping a dragon was a risk few would dare to take. Ethan shook his head. "I can't just leave you," he whispered. Flare lifted his tiny head and made a soft, weak noise, almost like a whimper. Ethan felt his resolve harden. He would take the risk, no matter what. He bundled himself up and stepped outside into the storm. The snow whipped his face and stung his eyes, but he kept moving toward a small cache of supplies he had hidden among the rocks. Every step was heavy, every breath painful, but the thought of Flare shivering alone kept him going. He dug through the snow, finally reaching a metal crate he had buried for emergencies. Inside were some dried food packets, a few water pouches, and a small first aid kit. As he gathered the supplies, he heard a distant shout carried by the wind. He froze. His heart began to pound. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice shaking. Only silence answered. Then a shadow moved across the snow, quick and low. A scavenger from the colony? Or someone worse? Ethan tightened his grip on the crate and darted back to the shelter, trying to stay low, hoping the storm would hide him. When he reached the shelter, he slid inside and slammed the flap shut, pulling the blankets tight. Flare looked up at him with wide, fearful eyes. Ethan set the crate down and opened it. He pulled out some dried meat and broke it into tiny pieces. Flare sniffed, hesitated, and then carefully ate, curling closer to Ethan for warmth. Ethan smiled faintly, exhausted. Hours passed, and the storm raged outside. Ethan realized he had to think carefully. Flare was injured, and keeping him safe meant hiding him well. He needed more than blankets, he needed a place where no one could find them. He remembered the old abandoned tunnels near the edge of the colony, dark, hidden, and almost impossible to enter except by someone who knew the path. It would be dangerous to go there, especially in the storm, but it might be their only chance. "I don't want to leave you," Ethan said, gently brushing the dragon's small head with his hand. Flare nuzzled against him. The trust in those tiny eyes made Ethan's heart ache with both hope and fear. He wasn't just protecting an animal. He was protecting a being that could be hunted, captured, or killed. Every step outside the shelter could bring danger, and yet he felt he had no choice. Night fell, though the storm made it feel like darkness had swallowed the world. Ethan wrapped Flare carefully in blankets and placed him in a makeshift carrier. Then, with one last look around the shelter, he stepped out into the frozen wasteland again. The wind screamed, the snow stung his face, and the world felt cruel and unforgiving. But Ethan kept moving, guiding the little dragon toward the hidden tunnels. Halfway there, a distant howl reached his ears. He froze. It wasn't the wind, it was a sound he recognized from stories of hunters tracking dragons. Panic surged, but Ethan forced himself to breathe. He ducked behind a rock, shielding Flare in his arms. He stayed completely still, listening. The noise passed, moving toward the cliffs, and he let out a long, quiet breath. Ethan realized then how fragile their safety was. One mistake, one wrong step, and Flare could be lost, or worse. But looking down at the little dragon sleeping against him, he felt a fire light inside. Fear was there, yes, but so was courage. Humans could survive against impossible odds, the stories always said. And maybe, just maybe, he could survive too, if he stayed smart and brave. By the time they reached the entrance of the hidden tunnels, Ethan was shaking from cold and exhaustion. He carried Flare carefully inside, making sure the little creature was comfortable. Inside the tunnels, it was dark, damp, and strange, but it was safe. Ethan lit a small lantern and set it down near Flare, who looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes. "You're safe here," Ethan whispered. "For now." He sank down on the cold stone floor, wrapping his arms around the dragon. He thought of the colony outside, of hunters, of storms, and he knew the risk had only just begun. But for the first time since finding Flare, he felt a small, bright spark of hope. Outside, the wind howled like an angry beast. Inside the tunnel, a boy and a dragon huddled together, two fragile lives against a dangerous world. And for the first time, both of them understood what it meant to trust someone completely. The tunnels were dark and cold, but they were safe from the storm outside. Ethan settled down on a flat rock and gently placed Flare on a bed of blankets he had arranged. The little dragon shivered but looked around with wide, curious eyes, sniffing the damp air. Ethan lit a small lantern, the soft glow bouncing off the walls and reflecting in Flare's scales, which shimmered faintly in the light. Ethan took a deep breath. "I'm going to take care of you," he said softly. "No one will hurt you here." Flare tilted his head and made a soft, almost happy noise, pressing closer to him. Ethan smiled, even though he was exhausted. Somehow, this tiny, fragile creature had made him feel alive, like he had a purpose beyond surviving. For hours, Ethan and Flare stayed close. Ethan fed him small pieces of dried meat, watching carefully as the little dragon ate slowly. Every so often, Flare would look up at him, almost as if studying him, learning about him. Ethan shivered again, not from the cold, but from a strange feeling he couldn't explain. He felt like the dragon understood more than any animal should. Over the next few days, Ethan worked hard to care for Flare. He melted snow for water and warmed the dragon with his body whenever he slept. Each time he touched him, he could feel tiny sparks of energy, like the dragon was alive in a way that was more than just flesh and scales. Ethan had heard legends about dragons, about their intelligence and strange powers, but he had never imagined it could be real. One evening, as Ethan sat feeding Flare, the little dragon lifted his head and opened his mouth slightly. A faint, soft glow came from inside, illuminating the inside of his tiny throat. Ethan gasped. "Flare, what are you doing?" The glow pulsed gently, warming the blankets around him. Flare blinked, then pressed his head against Ethan's chest, as if apologizing or asking for comfort. Ethan realized something incredible. Flare was showing him a part of himself, a power he didn't understand yet. Over the next few days, the bond between them grew stronger. Ethan talked to Flare quietly, telling him stories about the colony, about humans, about survival. Flare listened, tilting his head or making small noises at certain words. Sometimes, Ethan thought he saw understanding in those big, shining eyes. The dragon was not just an animal, he was intelligent, curious, and almost, aware in a way that was frightening and amazing at the same time. One night, Ethan awoke to find the little dragon standing on his chest, wings outstretched slightly, making a soft, humming noise. The glow from Flare's throat filled the tunnel with a warm light. Ethan sat up, surprised, and touched him gently. "You're okay," he whispered. Flare nudged his hand, and the glow faded, but a warmth stayed in Ethan's chest. It was as if the dragon was sharing something with him, trust, hope, and a strange connection he couldn't explain. Ethan realized he was learning from Flare too. The dragon's small movements, his reactions, even his breathing, taught Ethan patience, care, and observation. He noticed tiny details, like the way Flare's claws reacted to touch or how his eyes tracked the light. Every day, the bond grew stronger, and Ethan began to understand that Flare was not helpless. He was powerful in his own way, small, yes, but extraordinary. Then one evening, while exploring the tunnel walls with a lantern, Ethan noticed strange symbols etched into the stone. They were faint and covered in dust, but something about them felt alive. Flare stepped closer, his claws lightly touching the carvings. The glow from his throat pulsed, and the symbols began to shimmer faintly. Ethan's heart raced. He had stumbled upon something ancient, something tied to Flare's kind. Flare nudged him toward the symbols and made a low, soft noise. Ethan understood, these were not just carvings, they were a message, a memory, maybe even a guide. He traced the shapes carefully with his fingers, feeling warmth beneath the cold stone. Flare circled him, eyes glowing softly, almost proud. Ethan felt a thrill of wonder. He had discovered something incredible, something that connected humans and dragons in a way he could barely understand. Over the next days, Ethan studied the carvings with Flare's help. The dragon seemed to respond to the symbols, glowing brighter when they were correct, almost teaching Ethan without words. Ethan realized that Flare was not just a creature to protect, he was a teacher, a partner, a being with knowledge that could change the way humans saw the world. As they sat together in the glowing tunnel, Ethan felt something new. He wasn't just a boy trying to survive anymore. He was part of something bigger. A bond had formed, unbreakable and alive. Flare wasn't just a dragon in need, he was a friend, a guide, and maybe the key to something extraordinary waiting beyond the frozen wasteland. Outside, the wind continued to howl, and snow piled against the hidden tunnel entrance. Inside, a boy and a dragon huddled together, sharing warmth, trust, and a growing understanding of each other. The bond between them was more than survival, it was hope. And in the quiet glow of the tunnel, Ethan realized one truth: with courage, care, and trust, humans could rise above the harshest world, even if it started with saving a tiny, trembling dragon. The tunnel was quiet at first, the soft glow from Flare's scales lighting the walls. Ethan sat close to the little dragon, tracing his fingers gently over the soft blankets that protected him from the cold stone floor. But the quiet didn't last long. A distant sound echoed through the tunnel, footsteps crunching on snow and ice, uneven and heavy. Ethan froze. His heart pounded in his chest. The footsteps grew louder, closer. He grabbed Flare, pulling him close. "Shoo, stay quiet," he whispered, pressing the dragon to his chest. Outside, the storm howled, but beneath the wind, he could hear voices, shouts, harsh and urgent. Hunters. Scavengers from the colony who believed dragons were dangerous, who killed them for sport or reward. Ethan swallowed hard. If they found Flare, the little dragon wouldn't survive. He peeked through a small crack in the tunnel. Shadows moved against the snow, carrying torches that flickered in the storm. Their leaders shouted, and Ethan caught a word he recognized: dragon. Panic surged, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had to think. Flare depended on him, and he could not fail. Ethan's mind raced. The tunnel forked ahead, one path narrow and steep, the other lower and wider but longer. If he led Flare through the narrow path, they might hide better, but the climb could be dangerous for the injured dragon. The wider path was safer for Flare but risked being spotted. Ethan made his choice. He would take the risk and go narrow. It was their only chance. Carefully, he lifted Flare, cradling him against his chest. The dragon made a soft, nervous noise but stayed still, trusting him. Ethan moved quietly, stepping over rocks and ice, feeling the tunnel walls with his free hand. The cold bit into his skin through his gloves, but he ignored it. One wrong move, one noise too loud, and everything could be lost. Behind them, the shouts grew louder. The hunters were close, and Ethan could hear the scrape of metal against ice. He pressed forward, heart hammering, every sense alert. He reached the narrow climb, a steep wall of frozen rock. Ethan gritted his teeth and began pulling himself upward, careful not to slip. Flair's tiny claws clung to his coat, almost gripping him as if helping. The little dragon's warmth against his chest gave him courage. Halfway up, a rock shifted under his foot, sending a small shower of ice down. Ethan held his breath, listening for sounds below. The hunters cursed, but the storm swallowed most of the noise. Relief washed over him, but it was temporary. He still had to climb the rest of the way, and the tunnel ahead narrowed even more. Finally, after what felt like hours, Ethan reached a small ledge. He lowered Flair gently and sat down, both of them gasping for air. The dragon's eyes shone faintly in the dim light, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw a spark of pride, as if Flair knew they had survived the first danger. Ethan smiled, even though he was cold, tired, and scared. Courage, he realized, was not about never being afraid, it was about moving forward even when fear was screaming in your chest. The hunters' voices grew distant as the storm hid their movements. Ethan knew it was only temporary. They would come back. The world outside wanted Flair captured, but Ethan refused to give up. He looked at the little dragon curled up beside him. "We have to be ready," he whispered. "You and me, together." Flair made a small, soft sound, leaning closer to him. Over the next few days, Ethan moved Flair deeper into the hidden tunnels, finding safer spots and covering their tracks. He scavenged for food during brief moments when the storm eased, always keeping Flair safe. Every step was dangerous. Every shadow could hide a hunter. But Ethan learned to move silently, to think ahead, to anticipate danger. His body ached, and his hands were raw from climbing, but his determination never wavered. Flair grew stronger too. His scales reflected light brighter, and he began to move more confidently, testing his wings in the small space of the tunnels. Ethan watched in amazement as the little dragon learned to use his abilities carefully, almost as if he knew they needed to survive together. Ethan realized something incredible. Flair was not just relying on him, he was learning to fight, to protect himself, and to help Ethan in return. One evening, as Ethan sat sharpening a small knife he had scavenged, Flair nudged his hand. His throat glowed faintly, casting light over the walls. Ethan looked up and saw the symbols in the tunnel walls shimmering. Flair's powers were responding to them, almost guiding Ethan to understand their meaning. Ethan's heart raced with hope. Maybe they could find a way to protect themselves, maybe even the world beyond the tunnels. But danger was always near. Ethan knew the hunters would return. The colony would hear whispers. They would be hunted again. Yet, sitting there with Flair, Ethan understood something important: courage was contagious. The small dragon had trust in him, and that trust gave him strength. Humans could rise above fear, above impossible odds, if they chose to act, if they chose to protect what was right. Outside, the storm continued to rage, covering their tracks in snow. Inside, a boy and a dragon prepared for what was coming. They were vulnerable, yes, but together, they were strong. And Ethan knew one truth: the world would soon see human courage in a way no one expected, and Flair would be at the center of it all. The storm had passed, leaving the wasteland cold and silent. Ethan stood at the entrance of the hidden tunnel, Flair cradled in his arms. Outside, the snow glimmered under the pale light of the twin moons, stretching across the frozen ground like a vast, empty ocean. It was quiet, too quiet, but Ethan didn't care. He had made his choice. He would no longer hide. The world needed to see the truth: dragons were not monsters, and humans were capable of courage beyond fear. Ethan took a deep breath. Flair's little claws clung to his coat, and the dragon's glowing throat pulsed softly in the darkness. Ethan whispered, "It's time, Flair. Let's show them what we can do." The little dragon nuzzled his chest, and Ethan felt a warmth that went beyond the cold wind. Together, they stepped out of the tunnels, into the open wasteland. The colony below the cliffs was buzzing. News had spread quickly. A boy had been seen with a dragon. Hunters and villagers gathered, torches flickering in the early morning light, shouting warnings and threats. Ethan's heart pounded, but he held his ground. Flare, sensing the tension, raised his tiny head. Then, slowly, a glow began to radiate from his scales, spreading light across the snow and ice. A hush fell over the crowd. The villagers froze, watching the small dragon's power illuminate the wasteland. The hunters shifted uneasily, realizing this was no ordinary creature. Ethan stepped forward, holding Flare carefully in his arms. "He's not a threat," he shouted, his voice echoing across the icy plain. "He needs protection, just like anyone else. And we can learn from him, if we have courage." The villagers whispered among themselves. Many had never seen a dragon so small, so fragile, and yet so powerful. Flare's glowing throat pulsed in rhythm with Ethan's heartbeat, as if he understood the boy's words. Then, suddenly, the little dragon unfurled his wings. Tiny sparks of frost and fire danced in the air, swirling around Ethan in a protective, dazzling display. The crowd gasped. Children clutched their parents' hands, some in fear, some in awe. One of the lead hunters stepped forward, hand on his weapon. "Boy! That dragon is dangerous. Step back." Ethan didn't flinch. "He's not dangerous," he said firmly. "He's amazing. And he trusts me. If we all have courage, we can survive together, not fight each other." Flare let out a small, musical cry, and frost rippled across the snow, forming intricate shapes and symbols that shimmered in the sunlight. The villagers' fear began to turn into astonishment. Ethan lowered Flare slightly, letting the dragon see the crowd. Flare stepped forward, small claws crunching in the snow, eyes glowing warmly. He wasn't attacking. He was showing them what humans and dragons could do together. Slowly, the villagers began to step back, unsure, but mesmerized. The hunters hesitated, lowering their weapons as the boy and dragon moved forward with quiet confidence. Then, a miracle happened. The symbols etched into the frozen ground began to glow, spreading light across the entire valley. The ice, the snow, and even some of the dead plants shimmered with a strange, alien energy. Ethan realized Flare's kindness, combined with human courage, was activating something ancient. The land itself seemed to respond, as if it had been waiting for someone brave enough to show trust and compassion. Ethan felt tears in his eyes. "We did it, Flare," he whispered. The dragon purred softly, brushing his head against Ethan's chest. Together, they had shown the world that courage was not just fighting, it was caring, protecting, and standing up for what was right, even when the odds were impossible. The crowd began to cheer quietly at first, then louder, until their voices echoed through the valley. People who had mocked, feared, or doubted Ethan now looked at him and Flare with awe. The hunters lowered their heads in respect. The boy who had once been scared and alone had become a symbol of hope. He had not only saved Flare but had reminded everyone of what it meant to be human, brave, compassionate, and extraordinary. As the light from Flare's scales faded with the rising sun, Ethan realized something important. The dragon was no longer just a creature he protected. He was a partner, a friend, and a sign that humans could rise above fear and doubt. Together, they had changed the world in a way no one had expected. Ethan looked down at Flare, whose small head rested against his arm. "We're going to be okay," he whispered. "The world will understand now. Our courage, our bond, it matters." The little dragon blinked slowly, as if agreeing. Outside, the snow sparkled, and the valley seemed brighter, warmer, and alive with possibility. From that day forward, stories spread across the colony, and beyond, about the boy who had saved a dragon, and the dragon who had trusted a human. They became legends, not because of battles fought with weapons, but because of courage, trust, and the strength to do what others could not. And in the hidden tunnels, the little dragon and the boy rested together, knowing that the world had changed forever, and that humans, when brave enough to act, could inspire wonder, hope, and awe in even the most impossible places.